Welcome to another episode of the Top Shelf podcast. Today's guest is David Robson, Managing Director of Equitrans Logistics. David's got a great story, very fascinating story of how he has been part of a key part of, I'd say, industry in Dubai and how he has grown his business over the last 20 odd years. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, my pleasure. David, I'd like to just start off with a question, which is if you could just explain what you do, what your business is about, what your current role is, what your role is in the business.
So, John, what we do is we essentially are a travel agent for horses. But what we do is we move horses from point A to point B and look after everything from the health, veterinary, so that's all your bloods, vaccinations, quarantine, and then the logistics of moving a horse from one point to the other, stable to stable or door to door, as you'd call it.
Okay, and I mean, can you explain how how that industry, or how that serves the broader industry around all the different areas of the horses in whether it's racing or whether it's polo. Yeah, how do you serve the different sectors of that in Dubai?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, when we started out, majority of the movement of horses was for race horses. That was basically racing like your Dubai World Cup, your Melbourne Cup, Kentucky Derby, all the big races, and then the smaller races as well from it. So a large population of horses that moved around initially would have been more for flat racing, as you call it, and breeding. And these horses would move between Europe, UK, America, the UAE, other countries in the Middle East. Over the years, what's happened is you've found equestrian sports disciplines become more diversified, for different regions, where you've got horses going from flat racing. Now you've got show jumping, you've got polo horses, and then you've also got endurance racing, which became quite popular over the last 10 years, which is essentially marathon racing, where you have horses racing in the desert or in a forest for over 80 kilometers or 120 kilometers. So as as I've just said, you've got horses that have grown in terms of the different disciplines that they compete in, and therefore they move around because there's more international competitions, whether it would be for the Olympics or Asian Games or endurance championships or other show jumping events that happen around the world.
Yeah, very interesting. So, but how did you, David, end up in the Middle East? I'd love to know the story of how you ended up in the Middle East, and tell us a little bit of the different roles that you've worked in before you set up your company, and how you ended up setting your own company up.
So I think it was 1998 that I came to Dubai on a holiday after university, looking at what are the options. It was quite a vibrant city that was growing at that time, and my dad just said, go and make a man of yourself. So I thought, let's have a look and see what kind of jobs were around. Interviewed for a couple of roles here. I've always had a flair towards aviation and animals. So the interest grew on the horse side of things. And I came across a job while I was here that I interviewed for, which was to do with, it was a Hong Kong-based company called UFreight that looked after, they were freight forwarder. So they did different other parts of different products. But the live animals part was something that they were trying to grow and develop further. And they looked after all the work of Shedwell Farms, which was the late His Highness Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum's horses. Those horses were horses that would move back and forth between the UK, America, and here. And I was offered a role for business development there, started out. Over a period of time, was quite keen to take all that movement, which was being outsourced, and see how we can do it in-house. So through several discussions, the chairman then said to me, well, if you want to try, give this a try, and you think you know what you're doing, you can go out, find your own business. And if it works, then we'll consider bringing it in-house. So I started with my first client being Khalid Al Nabuda. He's quite a prominent Arabian racing breeder over here in Dubai. He races Arab horses. So we started with his shipments bit by bit. So started amalgamating things, got what we needed to be put together, systems, trucks, stables, quarantine, and the rest. And then from there, I'd say the business grew from about 1,500 horses to about 800 horses a year. I was with them for about 7 years, and that's when His Highness Sheikh Mohammed decided to set up their own organization for moving horses, have their own planes, and consolidated all the Maktoum business. So that was 7 years, which ended about 2002, the beginning of 2002.
Okay, now was this an industry that you aspired to get into when you were younger, or is this what did you grow up wanting to be?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I've had family in aviation, so always had a flair towards looking at something towards the aviation sector. Didn't have the means at that time to go off and become a pilot or go to flight school. So looked at the next best thing that I could go do. I was keen to look at something like the hotel management side, which I wanted to study, but I eventually went off the economics and business administration. And having grown up in a family with a small business, which was interior decoration, I thought maybe one day I'll have my own business, but didn't know what it would be. So it was an interesting thing when I came here through friends and then through a cousin, mulled around trying to see which side I'd get involved in. My aim was more the aviation side, which was more an airline, to get into an airline at that point. That was the goal. But then when this came along and had the mix of both the aviation side with animals and horses, I thought, well, that's an interesting pick. Let's try and see if we can make something of it. In a way as well, they say sometimes you have things that cross your path that you don't know whether that's going to be for you or not. But it was a mix of the two. So we had a good family friend as well growing up who was a horse trainer. So having heard things about horses and training and racing and things like that, I never thought at that point that's something I would lean towards or go towards. But when a role opened up here, it was quite interesting. We went down that route, and the first 7 years wasn't easy. It was trying to make your mark in an all boys club where it was quite a closed off and very close knit network as well of individuals, whether it's bloodstock agents that buy and sell horses or bloodstock shipping agents, which was predominantly controlled by the UK or Europe, and America being, I would say to some extent. But, I would say over the first 2-3 years, it was quite interesting to see once we'd broken ground, how we grew and what it became.
Now, I would say the margin for error in your business is pretty small, and your clientele have got huge expectations around quality of service, especially as you have to deliver your services around a lot of events. So I'd love to know, what are the biggest challenges that you face in your business, and how do you make sure that the business is set up to deliver to those challenges, to the requirements?
Yeah, John, I'd say one of the biggest challenges for us in our business is dealing with live animals. It's almost like trying to focus on a moving target, because it changes from day to day, and you've got several different variables that form the mix of it. Because we are reliant in a lot of what we do on different parties or different partners. So we work with airlines on one side, we've got the veterinarians on the other side, we've got labs, we work with quarantines, And then you're looking at the whole thing where you're trying to actually put this big puzzle together, where you have to work backwards from where you're going to, because wherever you're shipping a horse or handling an event, everything comes down to what's going to happen in the end in the country that it's going to, because they would establish what requirements you have for coming into that country, whether it's permanent or temporary, and then going back out. So I would say we consistently work under pressure, because with live animals, like I've said to you, it's unlike moving cargo, where if you have a box and it didn't make that flight, you stick it in a warehouse and you can put it on the next flight. But over here, a large part of the horses we move for events and projects would be that they're going to either race or to compete in an event. So it's almost like an athlete that, he's got a schedule that he needs to be there for a particular race or a particular event, and has to be delivered in that top performance, really, to be able to go out and compete.
And in order for you to deliver your service, you're depending on a lot of different counterparties in the process. So, I mean, how do you manage that? Where some of these some aspects maybe of your service are out of your control.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for us would be the partners that we pick. So we believe that we want to be able to deliver a service above par, and we operate at a certain level. So the partners that we pick have to be partners that operate on the same level. At the same time, there are certain things that is beyond your control. So we are dependent on a lot of carriers that are commercial carriers, because all our horses that we move on a day-to-day basis would go on scheduled airline services, which are cargo planes that we buy space on, which go on the main deck. So you would put, to give you an understanding, you get a stall and you get 3 horses in the stall. That's economy. If you basically put the partitions together and then you get 2 horses, that's business, and you get 1 horse on there, that's like a first class. So it's more room in each stall. But in that, talking about events, when you're looking at a 777 freighter, for example, the Boeing 777, we'd get 75 horses on that plane in economy class.
Mm-hmm.
If we're doing a charter, we take the whole plane. If we're just basically moving horses for, a group of horses, whether it's 6 or 15 or whatever else, you buy space for a particular day and you operate on that. Now that can change, because if an aircraft goes tech and there's problems with it, there's delays, a lot of that is dependent on challenges that we have to mitigate, which is blood tests that are valid for a certain time, vaccinations valid for a certain time. So you constantly, your checks and balances are constant in this game.
Yeah, like it's a fascinating business you're in. What I'd love to know is, when you formed your business 2002, I think you mentioned, you were a new entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to know a little bit about what you learned on the journey as an entrepreneur, as a leader, and if you were to be talking to other potential entrepreneurs that are a little bit younger than you, what knowledge could you pass on from the experience you've had over the last 20 odd years, from launching a business to where you are now?
I would say the early days were interesting days, because you could, when you're young and you're aspiring, you almost fly by the seat of your pants, thinking you can conquer everything and anything. And as time goes by and you face the realities of what you have to face of running a business, one of the key things that I learned from early days, very early on, and it probably comes from my grandmother, is that you pay your bills on time and you make sure you collect on time. Cash flow was probably one of the key things, especially in our business or any business. If you didn't have the cash flow, you're not going to be able to have progression of business. So There were times, I think, when I did get a few frights because you did business on trust, but then at times you were chasing to get payments made and or money collected. And I think living in this part of the world, you have to have an understanding of culture where how you approached asking someone for money that was owed to be paid could either make or break a relationship. So one of the lessons I have going back when I was quite young was a large sum of money owed. Basically, we'd done a big shipment, and I've been chasing, trying to get paid, and hadn't got paid for a while. But I think back to those days and just thinking about the fact of the persistence, but also for the fact of trying to maintain the relationship, probably got me paid sooner than I would have if I'd gone the other way. So from a young entrepreneur, I would say that was a key lesson from the early days, which someone just said, go sit down and have a coffee and, talk about the things that are important to him and see how you get on. And it was probably the best advice I was given.
Well, so on that point. I mean, you've raised a really an interesting area of business, and I'd love to know, how important are developing relationships and nurturing relationships? How important have they been for you in business, whether that across all your stakeholders, obviously around the client side, but also, within the industry, your partners, employees, etc. I'd love to know what your views are on relationships, and specifically in the context of operating in this region.
I would say, John, that's probably a pivotal thing for any business anywhere, but even more so in this region. The relationships, for me, I would say building the relationships, maintaining them, nurturing them, has probably been one of the greatest successes for us in this business over the years. And that hasn't been easy. That's come over time. I believe people work with people they like working with. And that's something that you've got to try and foster. It doesn't happen overnight. But also over here in this region, it's not about just a question of who you know, but I think it's also what you know, because in this kind of business, if you've made an error, you make a silly mistake in what you do, you normally don't get a second chance. So what we say in our business, you only get one chance. You're only as good as the last job you've done. So if the last job you've done, is a bit of a disaster, there's nothing more that's going to come from it. And that's the reason why what we try and do is we try and deliver as we promise, but at the same time, we also try and maintain those relationships by seeing the vendors we work with, building those relationships, because they're key. We're buying from them, but at the same time, the customers, most of our business comes from here because the buyers sit here. So even though the horses are 65% coming in as imports and probably 35% going out, it's a large buying market coming in. So it's important to foster relationships here.
And what is key to fostering a relationship or maintaining a good relationship or nurturing it? I mean, I think you're alluding to the fact that if you can build a relationship, then you can keep a long-term client. You can grow the business on the back of key relationships. You can get through some tough times on the back of key relationships. But I'd love to know your philosophy on how you would pass on your knowledge on how to do that, in effect, how to create good relationships, maintain good relationships.
So what I've done is, in our industry, I've tried to be at events that are important to the customers we work with. Try and be there to understand who their families are, ask about their kids. For some of the guys we work with, their kids are their horses. So if you know what's happening about their horses, what they won, or a mare or that's just had a new foal, had a new baby, asking about that, you going out to the farm or the stable to see that. Those things are very key to a lot of the guys here because they believe in community. this part of the region is based on community. So making the time, and in the old days, it used to be easier for me to do that because I could get out more and see more people, and life was a bit slower than what it is now. And that's the biggest challenge at the moment, is making that time to still do what you used to do in the old days when I started. And when I think back, I wonder how we fitted it all in. Is I would go and have a coffee with someone at their stable, to go and have a coffee with someone at their office, talk through what they had coming, what's their plans. And a large part of our business, John, really grew from word of mouth as a result of that. It was basically because someone was happy with, who we were, how we did things, that they would say to their friend in a majlis, listen, use David Robson, he ships all my horses, or use so-and-so for this. So, to answer your question, for young entrepreneurs out there, one of the key facts that I learned was, in the early days, you're looking at trying to be successful as to, how quickly you can grow a business and how quickly you can make this as profitable as you need to. But one of the things I've learned is, if you're not chasing the money and you're doing things properly, which is what I was taught from early days, you've got a passion for something, you do it properly, the money will come. But if you're chasing the money, then it's the wrong way around.
Now, do you operate outside, in any other parts of the region? And how do you see the industries that you're in? How do you see them evolving in the likes of Saudi over the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Oh, it's a very interesting question. So we do work, or we have done work for the last 20 years out of Bahrain, Oman, Saudi. Used to do quite a bit out of Qatar, but that's fizzled out for us at the moment. And I would say Saudi is a huge growing market in all ways, but even from the racing perspective, from our side. So you've got the Saudi Cup, which is second highest purse in the world for racing, in terms of prize money. And then you've got big events coming in Saudi from an equestrian side. They've got World Endurance Championships. They're developing Alula to be one of the biggest equestrian sport facilities in the world. So there's a lot that's coming from there. They're building the infrastructure for it. And I would say, as a result of trying to be a country and cities that you place on the map, they would probably look at doing what many other countries and cities have done, so you have different sporting events, like you see the golf, you see the Formula One racing, and then you've got the horse racing, which is a big part of it. How and where it would go would be interesting. I think, this part of the world has always been, if that guy's doing it, then we want to do it better. So the competition is good for any industry I think you're in, which would help here and help other regions, Bahrain and Oman and so on. But definitely large growth coming from there.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I think anybody who's not in Saudi, who's operating in the region, but certainly in the UAE and Dubai, is keeping a close eye on how the different sectors or industries are evolving, and just I guess timing when the right opportunity might be to expand their operations, right?
Certainly, yeah, certainly. I think we've had we've done a few events in and out of Alula, and that is a growing part, Alula particularly. You've also got Riyadh, which hosts one of the biggest races as well, like I said, and then you've got polo as well that's come to Alula. So there's different equestrian disciplines, and like you say, in every industry, I think there's growth coming from there.
Well, I've been to the Gold Cup myself, actually, a long time ago when I lived in Saudi. I had some friends. I worked for Al Mirai, so the owner of Al Mirai, had his own racing horses as well, and they used to race in the Gold Cup as well as the World Cup here, actually. So I had friends that worked in his on the stud farm side of his business. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean about the Gold Cup. I was there 20 years ago, and it still had a lot of jockeys coming in back then. So can imagine it's only going to get bigger and bigger and more prominent with all the other sports that Saudi's investing in. But it's always been there, right? The Gold Cup's been around for a long time.
Yeah, it has. You're right. Yeah, it's grown from the old days, and I think what they're doing now is they're bringing in a lot more international horses to race, which is a great thing for Saudi.
So what are your aspirations yourself now for Equitrans over the next 5 years and further afield?
Where we're going is we've got a road plan to grow our network, so regionally, and then a couple more offices in our main markets, that we focus on, with the potential of, over COVID, when COVID came, we extended the business because all horse racing, as you know, stopped, and the movement of horses was reduced to probably a tenth of what we do. So we started moving small animals at that time. We moved dogs and cats, and then we grew the business, which we were doing some of the zoological animals previously, but we grew the business a bit into the livestock side as well. And that just came as a result of some of the food security that's going on in this region, where we had customers that owned horses and horse farms that were now looking at bringing in, whether it's cows or sheep and so on. So over COVID, that business grew, and we've kept that segment of the business on and continued to let that operate, in an autonomous way from the horse side of the business. Where it could grow to and what it could become as the food security becomes bigger here, we see the numbers increasing. And most of that's being done by air now, not by sea, because of the issues that we've had with the Red Sea and so on. So much better way, obviously, to move animals from a welfare perspective. So all the business that we do is either by air or by road. We try and fly point to point, where you don't keep, whether it's horses or animals, on a truck for longer distances. So we fly from the closest point to where the horses originate from. That's the way we operate. And as a means, what we've tried to do is differentiate ourselves from, I would say, the herd mentality, which is basically, how could you do this cheapest? We're not interested in doing it cheapest. We're interested in being able to deliver a horse that's performance ready, wherever we're going or coming from. So our focus, I'd say, in the next 5 years is to grow the network, but focus on large events, projects, which seem to be growing internationally and regionally, where we're doing larger numbers that require specialization, so that the competition is less there as well.
Okay, so now moving away from the business side of things, what about your personal life? You've been in Dubai a long time. Like myself, you've seen an incredible transformation in so many ways, and continues to transform, and the pace is not going to stop. What do you like to do in your free time?
So one of the things I've developed as a hobby is cycling. As you know, it's the new golf, John. So it's you get out and you get to, it's also quite good where you build, it's a social element to it with mates. So I cycle, not as much as I used to. I'd like to cycle more. Sorry. I've started to play some golf at the moment, spent some time with my son so that we could do some father-son stuff together. And then I do a bit of wakeboarding from time to time, but I'm getting a bit too old for it, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, if you stay in shape, I mean, I don't know. Can you injure yourself wakeboarding?
Yeah, when you come off and you fall, and you feel it the next day. So it's good, but yeah, you use muscles that you don't normally use, like when you ski and you wake and you slalom.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I know. Look, I mean, most people in Dubai in our generation have definitely taken up cycling at some,
Yeah,
because the facilities are so good, right? I mean, when I look at other parts of the world where you and I come from, I mean, if you want to cycle, it's a little bit more dangerous, right? Because the roads are not, the roads are tighter, and there's not really enough room for cars and bikes on the same road. But out here, we've got incredible facilities right out, hundreds of miles of cycling track, or of course,
absolutely.
desert. Yeah, so I've done a fair bit of cycling myself, and it is a new golf because it's not as time consuming as well.
It is, yeah, and it's good for your head. Clears your head. I think that's one thing that's helped me in many ways. Is getting out and clearing your head. It's just that some temperatures, when it's summer here, it's harder to do. But what we do is we go and cycle in Mushroof Park, which is Motive, and that's more of the mountain biking, which is nice. So you get a bit of shade and cover there. And it's not too treacherous, like you would have with mountain biking elsewhere. So you've got some of the rolling hills, and you've got some parts which would require a bit more technical side. So yeah, I mean, the cycling is, again, it is a mission sometimes getting to, because it'll take you about 45 minutes depending from where you're going. But it's a good, like you say, I mean, I think we're spoiled in terms of the facilities we have here for cycling.
Yeah, we are. So look, reflecting on your life to date, you're still a young man, and there were plenty of great experiences ahead, I'm sure. But I'd love to know, for some of the younger generation that are starting out, what would you say to your 18-year-old self, knowing what you know now? What would you say to your what knowledge would you impart to your 18-year-old self? Yeah.
I believe one of the important things would be, when a person's younger, it would be good to find a couple of mentors. And you're not going to find a mentor that would actually serve all aspects of life. It's something, when I was younger, being here on my own, not having family, and not having, I'd say for most kids, they won't particularly go to their father or go to, they would always look for a mentor, maybe that's outside of their family, that would basically give them advice or challenge them or push them in a certain direction. But I'd say, to someone who's, to my 18-year-old self, I would have said, one of the things I'd like to do is find mentors in different segments of whatever's important to you. So whether that's business, faith, family, because one mentor cannot be everything to you. And by doing that, even to myself, you build a society around you of the right people that challenge you in the right way and also guide you in the right way. Because then what happens is it gives you aspirations and gives you reality checks that you would probably need from time to time to form the better version of yourself. So I'd say a large part of what we do when we're younger is made from emotional decisions that could be made, whether it's sporadically or reactively. And I think emotional intelligence is something that's become a bigger subject in the recent years, because going back in our time, not many people spoke about it when you were younger. So, yeah, I mean, when I look back over time, I think when you're younger, you don't realize as you're growing up how important family is to you, and you take certain things for granted. That's a reality check that I've had myself. And I also think you make certain decisions sometimes. We live in a country over here where you could get carried away very quickly. You come here and you live in a place where you think everything's there. Even me, as my young self, and it's finding that balance and finding people that are going to keep you balanced. I think is the most important thing. We all expats here, and finding good friendships that would help you harness the wind when you need to, but at the same time know when you have to put your sails down and just basically let yourself, drift for a while. So yeah.
Yeah, no, like that's great advice. I mean, I especially love what you mentioned about mentors, because from my experience, the different mentors that I've come across, often inadvertently through my life, have had a major impact, right? And my advice would be to the young generation is, don't often pick your roles or pick your jobs chasing money. Like, you can actually, if you can get access to someone who's going to pass on some amazing wisdom and help you on your journey, that's probably the greatest education you're going to have. So, mentors come in many different forms, right? But a lot of us have great mentors,
Yeah.
In our careers, or through friendships. And I think, friendships and health are probably the two things that we learn later in life to value the most, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so look, we're coming to the end of our chat. I like to ask everybody one particular question at the end, and that is, are there any particular books, authors, influencers, podcasts that you particularly listen to, and why? Why do they resonate with you? Often getting this type of insights from people on the podcast will be very helpful for our listeners.
One of the guys that I listen to a fair bit is an American guy called Craig Groeschel. He's obviously he's a leader in his own right, but at the same time as well has quite a few motivational talks with different subjects. And then another book that I always say has been helpful is Good to Great. I'm trying to remember the name of the author.
It's Jim Collins, actually.
Jim Collins, yeah, that's it. And then in terms of late, one of the things that I've been listening to a lot is one of the guys who has a podcast to do with the whole stock market, and there's a guy called Tom Nash. Could be a little controversial in some ways, but he has a different take on the stock market. So I just follow him on certain things that he comes up with and speaks about. And then who is the sorry, name's just gone out of my head. I'll tell you now. There's a guy I listen to, which is more to do with health and the rest of it. And he's called the podcast is called Feel Better, Live More, and it's by a guy called Dr. Chatterjee. So he comes up with some good subjects, which is to do with health, and obviously he was a businessman or entrepreneur at one point as well, did really well in his time, and then decided to basically stream back. So those are the few.
So can I just go back? The first you mentioned, was it Greg Rochelle?
Craig Groeschel. So with a C, yeah.
Craig Rochelle. Okay.
Craig Groeschel, yeah.
And you said he's good to just find online maybe.
Yeah, so he's more leadership podcasts. Yeah, Groeschel spelled as Groeschel.
Groch. Okay, great. Well, there's some great resources there, and I think I'm going to look a couple of them up as well, because I know two of them, but I haven't heard of Greg Rochelle or Tom Nash. So
yeah, Craig with a C. Yeah.
Craig Rochelle.
Yeah.
Tom Nash.
Okay.
Well, look, it's been great to chat with you today. You've had a fascinating journey in a very interesting and somewhat different industry, I guess, for a lot of people. It's quite specialized. So congratulations on a very successful career, building a great business. It's been great to chat with you today.
Thanks, John. Appreciate your time, and it's been good chatting as well.